Norwegian Cruise Line. Adventurous, unique, daring, innovative, unrestricted, and colorful. These are just a few of the possible words that could be used to describe the personalities of the ships that make up their extensive fleet and what they offer to their passengers. Like most of the major cruise lines around at the present time, there are both subtle and in-your-face ways to differentiate the ships of these lines based on how they present themselves externally. Arguably the most famous of these is the so-called whale tail funnel found on the vast majority of Carnival Cruise Line ships. For Norwegian, it is often the vibrant and sometimes extensive artwork that is painted along the sides of their ships' hulls. Chances are that if one passes by a cruise ship that has these eye-catching pieces painted on the side of its hull, that they are looking at one of NCL's ships. Although it is not just the unique hull art that helps them stand out among the ever-growing competition. For much of their history, NCL had been finding ways to break away from traditional or accepted norms within the cruise industry. Many of those pursuits looked at ways to enhance and change the typical cruising experience. Within the last several decades, the industry as a whole had been largely pursuing building bigger and more extensive ships than their previous ones for a variety of reasons. Even with everything these ships bring, for some regular cruisers, they felt alienated, feeling that smaller ships were the way to go. In the late 2010s, NCL decided to break the trend of continuing to go bigger and charted a different course to design a new class of smaller ships in order to help win over these sometimes dissatisfied cruisers and to prove that, yes, small ships can and still work. This is the story of that pursuit, the ships that immediately followed, and the lead ship of this daring new class, Norwegian Prima. Norwegian Prima is the lead ship in the Prima Class. Upon first looking at her, some can be mistaken that she is a lot bigger than she actually is. Despite having a somewhat similar hull width to some megaships and having a tall freeboard, she comes in at just over 143,000 gross tons in displacement. Her striking exterior design and smaller profile is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what was changed and attempted within this design of cruise ship, and all of it was in the pursuit of the somewhat untested and unsettling idea that brand new, smaller ships from a mainstream cruise line could work at the present time. And like any new item coming out in the market, there will be feedback, and it did not take long before the reviews of the beginning of this endeavor came out. The argument of passenger ships being too big, or supposedly having a limit in how big they could go, has been around since the very beginning of even the ocean liner back in the 1840s. Before that time, ships had largely stayed the same size due to the limits in how they were constructed and what they were made out of. But as new materials, construction methods, and new minds began to enter the passenger ship industry, the pursuit to improve and to make money was on. In 1845, the first passenger ship to be considered an ocean liner, the 3,674-ton SS Great Britain, entered service. 54 years later, White Star Line's RMS Oceanic entered service, closing the century as the largest passenger ship at 17,274 tons. While there was one ship in the late 1850s that was slightly bigger than her, Oceanic was considered a part of the culmination of the progression of the ocean liner during the 1800s. It had been a steady increase, but then the margins began to increase rapidly shortly thereafter. Remember, it took 54 years for ships to increase from 3,674 to 17,274, a difference of 13,600. In June 1911, White Star Line's newest ship, RMS Olympic, entered service with a tonnage of 45,324. In just 12 years, the difference in tonnage had well over doubled, increasing by 28,050. And for those familiar with the development of the Olympic class and other ships around that time, will know about the many worries and honest criticisms that were spoken about regarding the building of ships that large so quickly, whether it be the lack of existing infrastructure and facilities, down to how the ships will handle, and even the crew and passengers not being able to find their way around. They were all very valid concerns, and in some cases, it was demonstrated to be a real problem. In the cruise industry of today, the same argument exists. In each wave of new builds that has arisen since the 1980s, the margins have gotten bigger and bigger. This really began to be evident starting in the late 1990s, when cruise ship gross tonnages began to surpass the largest ocean liner built to that date, the nearly 84,000-ton RMS Queen Elizabeth, which had entered service just after the conclusion of World War II. Since the entering into service of Freedom of the Seas in June 2006, Royal Caribbean International has held the largest passenger ship title, having been at the forefront in the development of the mega cruise ship, arguably since the late 1980s with Sovereign of the Seas. So why have passenger ships continued to get bigger and bigger over the years? Well, in reality, there are many reasons, but these are a few of the common arguments. Starting off, it is more economical to build bigger ships. In order to fill a large amount of demand, and to keep operational construction costs reasonable, having several large ships rather than numerous smaller ones made more sense, not to mention the prestige that comes with having a bigger ship. That is part of the reason why ocean liner duos like RMS Queen Mary and RMS Queen Elizabeth existed in the first place. With that comes this simple point: the bigger the ship, the more people that could be on board each voyage. Plus, the bigger the ship, the more internal and external volume there is to play with. Simply put, a bigger ship allows for so many more possibilities and amenities to be placed on board, which would have been previously thought to be impossible to implement. And despite the long existing notion that there is a hard limit as to how big passenger ships could be, each time that the bar was raised, the critics were proven wrong. And largely thanks to the pursuits of Royal Caribbean, the average size of cruise ships has gone steadily bigger over the years, and each ship that has come out across the various lines has added its own unique flavor to the mega cruise ship cocktail. For much of their history, Norwegian Cruise Line had stayed relatively the same in terms of the sizes of their ships. Until the mid-2000s, all of their ships had stayed well under the 100,000-ton range. And, with the exception of SS Norway, the company never really pursued having the largest and greatest ship. It took no more than a quick glance from the typical observer to come to the conclusion that their ships were arguably average in their appearance. Nothing screamed excitement or adrenaline that made one think, I want to go on that ship. But that was not NCL's focus. Rather, their focus was to enhance the cruising experience through the services that could be offered on board. Their most famous implementation of this idea was the freestyle cruising concept, which first pioneered on Norwegian Sky in May 2000. The idea was to go away from the traditional idea of fixed dining times, schedules, and little offerings. Under this new idea, passengers could essentially do what they wanted when they wanted, being free of having to worry and stress over things like when to eat, where to eat, and what to wear. It was all about being casual and flexible, and to offer more choice and variety in dining and entertainment, all the way down to having a more relaxed disembarkation process. These concepts, though commonplace today, were revolutionary for the time, and it slowly made its way through the industry as a whole over time. It was this type of thinking that made NCL a real competitor despite not having innovative and record-breaking ships. However, the times began to change in ways NCL could no longer ignore. The mid-2000s saw the first cruise ships to exceed 150,000 tons, and excitement for the future of the industry was at an all-time high. Concepts for ships far bigger than what was currently in service were being seriously considered. It all culminated in February 2006, where Royal Caribbean announced Project Genesis, which would be the first passenger ship to surpass 200,000 tons. Between this, and combined with the largely now proven concept that ships over 100,000 tons were seen as profitable, popular, and desirable, NCL decided to make their move. The result of their initial push was the F3 project. Unfortunately, this project, which was to build two 150,000-ton ships with a third optional vessel, never fully materialized and definitely was not what NCL had hoped. The first ship was completed, but only after numerous delays, last-minute alterations, a standoff with the shipyard building the vessels, and the canceling of both the confirmed and optional sisters. On top of that, the vessel that was completed, Norwegian Epic, received at best mixed to poor reviews, and has been seen ever since her emergence as the ugly duckling of the industry. The F3 project taught NCL a lot about how to build bigger ships. As the saying goes, out of failure comes victory, and they went ahead and pursued another class altogether. The resulting Breakaway Class took many of the lessons learned from the F3 project, but dialed it up by having their own never-before-seen features that set them apart in a positive light. This included the first ever true water parks at sea, and a near wraparound semi-enclosed promenade which allowed for several alfresco dining options and unrivaled views of the sea. So successful were the first two ships, Norwegian Breakaway and Norwegian Getaway, that the next four of the class were massively increased in size to accommodate both more passengers and to add their own signature marks. Norwegian Escape had an entire deck added and has one of the most extensive ropes courses found at sea, even to this day, being 3 stories tall. Norwegian Joy pioneered the first true gaming center at sea, called Galaxy Pavilion, as well as the first ever go-kart track at sea. The last 3 members, Norwegian Joy, Norwegian Bliss, and Norwegian Encore, all further improved on the versatility aspect in terms of where the ships could operate. Between having numerous outward viewing areas that are either enclosed or have the ability to be enclosed or exposed, the ships are perfect in being able to cruise in all sorts of different climates and weather. NCL had finally tapped into the mega cruise ship industry in a big way, and were bringing on so many new cruisers while doing it. Now, if a casual observer saw their ships, there would indeed be excitement, and the thought of, "I want to go on that ship," would surely cross their mind. Each member of the class, with the exception of Getaway, had been bigger than the previous, with the final member, Encore, being 169,116 tons in size. It was not all positives regarding these ships, however. The most common issue found, especially with Encore, was the lack of space that was both free to use and was not an activity-based option. In some passengers' minds, the company's pursuit to add as many wow features to the ships as possible made them forget to take into account the simple things like spaces to relax and lounge. The complaints largely focused on the top decks. Let's use Encore as an example. The entire forward section, which is over 40% of this part of the vessel, was behind a paywall. To enter these areas, a passenger either had to be staying in a Haven suite or had to pay a hefty fee to enter the adults-only Vibe Beach Club. The aft 25% was taken up by either the go-kart track or the laser tag arena. Only 25 to 35% could actually be utilized by passengers for free, as well as for relaxation or simply hanging out. But there was an even bigger issue that was becoming more mainstream with not just NCL passengers, but passengers across the cruise market. During the prior 2 decades, with several exceptions, the mainstream cruise lines had only increased their ships in size, and it was felt that they were leaving those who don't like bigger ships behind. Their arguments, which are very much valid, but sometimes made without actually stepping aboard the ships in question, were and still are some of the following. Number 1. Big ships means too many people. Seeing that upwards of 5,000 to 6,000 people can be on one vessel at the same time is a turnoff for some. 2. The level of service is not the same. It is true that the greater number of passengers means a bigger crew to passenger ratio gap. This would inevitably lead to a drop in both the quality and level of service provided. This is very important to some, especially for those who certainly can't afford to travel on ultra-luxury lines like Silver Sea, Viking, or Regent 7 Seas. 3. The ships could be and sometimes are logistical nightmares to both navigate and to get around. Simply put, the bigger the ship, the longer it is to get to certain places, and the harder it may be to find a particular venue, which may make the whole experience overwhelming and stressful. 4. Some people don't need to be provided with many forms of thrilling activities. Some just simply want to be on a ship that focuses on good food, good service, and relaxing. And 5. Big ships have limits in where they can go. The bigger the ship, the fewer places that can accept them, offering little to no variety in possible itineraries. Their concerns gained more traction in the latter years of the 2010s, as most of the desired smaller ships this group of cruisers were sailing on were clearly entering into the twilight years of their service, being built 20 and sometimes even 30 years prior. And in some cases, these ships were not seeing the love and attention in the simplest of things, such as general maintenance, as the newer ones were. They were out of date, tired, and desperately needed a facelift, if anything. Rather than ignore this group of cruisers, NCL looked at these concerns and had an idea. In the same spirit as they had in the previous decades, they thought, someone has to do this, it should be us. In order to win over this somewhat unsatisfied market, they set a course to implement 2 things in the coming years. First, to heavily renovate several of their older and smaller ships, to essentially make them feel as if they were brand new. And second, to build a brand new, innovative class of ship with the purpose to be not only smaller, but to also introduce new features and to rewrite the rules in cruise ship design. February 16, 2017. A contract is signed between NCL and the legendary Italian shipbuilder Fincantieri to build 4 ships with options for 2 more. In a press release issued shortly thereafter, the shipbuilder provided some early details regarding the new class. Each ship's cost would be around $800 million, have a length of under 300 meters, or roughly 984 feet, have a guest accommodation of approximately 3,300, and have a gross tonnage of around 140,000 tons, making this class's members the smallest new builds for NCL since Norwegian Gem in 2007. The ships were expected to be delivered at a rate of 1 each year from 2022 through 2025, with the optional 2 extending into 2027. This new class of ships will continue Norwegian Cruise Line brand's legacy of introducing meaningful innovation to the cruise industry. This order continues to highlight our disciplined new build program, extends our growth trajectory well into the future, enhances our already attractive earnings profile, and drives expected long-term returns for our shareholders. Another interesting part of the press release was the following line. The order is based on a prototype project developed by Fincantieri, which enhances the consolidated features of NCL's signature offering of freedom and flexibility, qualified by an innovative configuration for an enhanced passenger experience. Those familiar with Fincantieri at the time would have known exactly what project they were talking about, giving them at least an early idea of what these ships could possibly look like. The base for this new class would be Project Mille, a ship concept first introduced in June 2013. Its goal was to provide cruise lines with a ship that is both better in revenue generating and efficient operations. To start, the design implemented a narrow superstructure, which would allow for a taller superstructure without compromising stability. A taller superstructure meant more outside view and balcony type cabins, which obviously commands more of a premium. To help further instability, most public rooms associated with the upper decks were moved lower down, including all of the pools. As long as proper safety features were implemented, fewer fire zones would be required. Overall, the design promised to provide 10% more cabins, 10% more open deck space, and a 10% increase in efficiency compared to traditional designs. The design was noted to be available in a variety of different sizes, with examples ranging from 60,000-ton, 1,500 passenger ship concepts up to 150,000-ton, 4,000 passenger concepts. NCL was not the first to take up this new design. Previously, MSC Cruises had initially ordered 2 ships under this project in 2014. By this point, both vessels were under construction and would be eventually completed as MSC Seaside and MSC Seaview. Additionally, the up-and-coming cruise line Virgin Voyages, then known as Virgin Cruises, had signed an order of intent for what would be their first 3 ships under this project back in June 2015. So for those familiar with Project Mille, the ideas were already circulating over what this new class would look like. With the expected debut of the first ship being more than 5 years down the road, it was expected that no further information or renderings would be released anytime soon. To the shock of many, it did not take very long before the first round of updates came in, and surprisingly, it came in the form of renderings. While attending the Seatrade Cruise Global Conference in Port Everglades just a month later, NCL Holdings CEO Frank Del Rio talked about the new class, referring to it as Project Leonardo, and released several aerial renderings of the concept. It was clear that it was still in the early phases of design, with the ship lacking any artwork or details beyond basics. It was exciting nonetheless to get these early views. He stated later on, "I've done my best to look in the crystal ball and figure out what's going to be hot, what's going to be cool, what's going to be the best thing that guests want in a ship in 2027. We're famous for always going against the grain. Not all destinations in the world can handle 4,000 or 5,000 passenger ships effectively, so we believe these vessels are the perfect size." Despite it being early renders, it was clear the ships were a Project Mille design, featuring multiple pools on a massively expanded semi-wraparound lower promenade, a narrow superstructure at the aft, and an exterior profile that screamed futuristic. Best of all, it seemed that they would be outward-looking vessels. With these first looks at the ships, the excitement as well as the expectations jumped to another level. With NCL being among the first of the major cruise lines to be breaking the trend of going bigger, there were a lot of eyes, even within the industry, focused on Project Leonardo. Would it work? Time would tell. Between then and the expected start of construction sometime between 2019 and 2020, the project continued along in the planning and development phase, with NCL collaborating with multiple respected architectural firms. No new news came until roughly 16 months later, in July 2018, when NCL confirmed the 2-vessel option of the order with Fincantieri. It seemed, at least from the outside, that NCL's confidence in this new class was pretty high. In Fincantieri's Magana shipyard located in Venice, Italy, the beginning of construction of the first Leonardo member, now known as yard number 6298, began sometime between fall 2018 and spring 2019. By late 2019, the majority of the ground blocks, which would comprise the hull and superstructure, were ready for assembly. On December 9, 2019, the first block was laid into the dry dock. Assembly of 6298 was finally underway. In early March 2020, NCL updated their order book details, showing that the class's details had not changed beyond what was listed from the beginning, the only exception being that the cost of each vessel would now be $850 million. Little did anyone know what was about to happen. Within a month, everything was uprooted. No news really came out regarding the status of the first vessel's progress in the summer months of 2020. Frustratingly, Fincantieri seemed not to be saying much either. However, there was nothing to indicate that something drastic was happening or that anything major was changing. News finally broke in May of 2021, and it was big news indeed. It was the official reveal of Leonardo 1. Her name would be Norwegian Prima. In the promotional video and in the subsequent press releases that followed, much was learned about this new ship. At first glance, one could not help but notice the striking hull artwork designed by Italian artist Mille de Rita. Some released information about Prima included her length being 965 feet, her tonnage being 142,500 tons, and having a guest capacity of 3,215. Despite not having sailed in more than a year, we never stopped working and innovating. We never once pressed pause. In fact, we doubled down on our brand investment in order to deliver unforgettable guest experiences that go well beyond expectations. Not only will we begin cruising this July, we're so proud and so incredibly happy to announce the start of an exciting new chapter as we introduce the Prima Class, and the first ship in a line of unrivaled vessels with Norwegian Prima. We innovated with purpose and created Norwegian Prima to push the boundaries of conventional cruising, offering our guests more wide-open spaces, thoughtful art and design, and world-class service, which places our guests at the heart of it all. The amount of information released was dizzying, including new dining options, venues, and the expanded suite-only area known by NCL as the Haven. Besides knowing about the ship herself, the best news was the itineraries. Her maiden voyage would occur on August 17, 2022, for a cruise to Northern Europe. From there, she would not remain in one place. She would instead essentially tour around the Western Hemisphere, offering various types of cruises out of the ports of Southampton, New York, Galveston, Miami, Port Canaveral, back to New York, Reykjavik, and finishing in Southampton again in summer 2023. 6 different home ports, all in the span of 1 year. Clearly, NCL was wanting to show Prima off. The excitement was definitely there. In the following days, NCL saw records break regarding the sales of Prima's first cruises. Norwegian Prima is already proving to be a game changer for NCL. Norwegian Bliss, which debuted in 2018 and boasted our biggest booking day ever during her unveiling, has been outpaced by Norwegian Prima, which has doubled the prior record. In addition, nearly 20% of the bookings are for our Haven suites, indicating the desire for top-of-the-line experiences. Every aspect of Norwegian Prima, from bow to stern, was conceptualized with the guest in mind. With this world-class ship, we are providing our guests with more wide-open spaces, elevated service, through design and a variety of experiences that go beyond expectation. Our record-breaking sales are a clear indicator of our guests' excitement to return to the ocean and of the significant demand for a premium vacation experience. On August 13th, the next milestone was reached. Yard number 6298 was launched at the shipyard in Venice. She was then towed barely a ship length away to the nearby fitting out pier where she would be transformed into a proper cruise ship. On January 12th, 6298's running mate, Leonardo II, was revealed. She would be known as Norwegian Viva. She was also met with fanfare, but there was one striking and unavoidable problem for some. The hull art was virtually identical to the one found on Prima. Previously, all of NCL's hull art was unique to each ship, having at best vague similarities with other ones. However, on Viva, the only difference would be a few alterations to the swirls on the forward bow, and changes in the colors from being variations of blue hues to purple hues. According to one source, she was apparently supposed to have hull art resembling that of the Dazzle paint scheme that was painted onto various warships and troop ships during World War I, but then at the last minute it was changed, and the little time that was left before the reveal meant Viva had no time to get a new, unique paint scheme. In March, additional details regarding Prima's venues were released, including several dining areas, the observation lounge, as well as the main atrium. One thing was very clear regarding what was known so far about her interior. Prima would have a much more elevated, brighter, and more modern feel than any of her counterparts in the Norwegian fleet. Unfortunately, just barely a month after this release, NCL was forced to cancel Prima's maiden voyage just several months away, with the company pointing to supply chain issues affecting the fitting out process. All guests received a full refund and 25% future cruise credit. Just a week after that, now into May, NCL announced some more unexpected news. All of the Prima Class ships coming after Viva would be roughly 10% bigger than the predecessors, each having a passenger capacity of roughly 3,550. This would mean, in turn, that the gross tonnage would be increasing. With no official number given, it was guessed to be somewhere between 150,000 and 155,000 tons, putting them slightly bigger than the Breakaway and Getaway, but still smaller than Epic, Joy, Bliss, and Encore. Even with the tonnage increase, it still categorized the ships as more lower-medium in size. But for those on the small ships only side, this was not the greatest of news. However, they still did have Prima and Viva to look forward to, and if they did well, hopefully other cruise lines would pursue similar ventures. On July 29, 2022, the big day of delivery finally came. NCL officially took ownership of their newest ship. Today we usher in a thrilling new era in cruising as we celebrate the delivery of Norwegian Prima, the long-anticipated first ship in our extraordinary new Prima Class. She is a true testament to our guest-first philosophy, as well as our commitment to deliver unforgettable experiences that exceed expectations. We thank our wonderful partners at Fincantieri, whose covered craftsmanship, expertise, and dedication helped bring Norwegian Prima to life. We cannot wait to welcome our guests on board. Luigi Matarazzo, General Manager of the Merchant Ships Division of Fincantieri, said, "We're glad to work with Norwegian Cruise Line to create a world-class series of ships, and it's a proud day seeing the first of the 6 Prima-class vessels delivered today. Norwegian Prima is packed with world firsts, never-before-seen features, and extraordinary attractions you would never expect at sea." Norwegian Prima was now ready to demonstrate the viability of the modern, smaller ship concept. Let's now take a brief tour of this vessel and get to know her a little better in terms of what she has to offer. Norwegian Prima emerged from the shipyard at 981 feet long, 132 feet 10 inches wide at the waterline, and a gross tonnage of 143,535, putting her just over 2,000 tons smaller than Norwegian Breakaway. Her human capacity is 3,099 passengers in double occupancy, as well as 1,506 crew members, giving the ship a near 2-to-1 passenger-crew ratio, as opposed to the more traditional 3-to-1 ratio found on other ships. Altogether, she has 1,646 cabins, ranging from 2,100 square foot suites to 94 square foot solo or studio cabins. Breaking it down, she has 6 owner suites, 58 courtyard penthouses, 43 regular suites, 1,030 balconies, 124 window, 385 interior, and 912 crew cabins. Maximum capacity of passengers and crew is 5,400. Deck 5 is the lowest of the public accessible decks, which features various types of cabins, almost all of which are ocean views. Deck 6 has the beginnings of the public spaces. Starting forward is the Prima Theater, which is also convertible into a nightclub thanks to the stadium-style seating being retractable. Aft is the lowest level of the Penrose Atrium. Behind here are the casinos, Cagney's Steakhouse, and the Commodore Room. Deck 7 has the midsection of the theater and the atrium. Working aft, there are several specialty dining options, including La Bistro, Hasuki, and Nama Sushi. also entertainment venues and lounges such as the Humidor Cigar Lounge, Sig Norman's, and the Improv. All the way at the aft is the main dining room, known as Hudson's. Talk about a departure from traditional main dining rooms, which are often more enclosed and are finished in darker tones. The premium and upscale finish with the near 270-degree views out the aft of the ship makes one feel as if they were in one of the highest-end restaurants on the ship. Deck 8 is the highest of the lower public decks. Located all around the outside is a wraparound promenade known as Ocean View Boulevard. There are several different distinct areas within this feature, such as Infinity Beach, featuring 2 infinity pools and lots of lounging space. It also serves as the exits of the 3 dry slides found on board. There is also a sculpture park known as the Concourse, a see-through floor area known as the Ocean Walk, where one can stand on glass with nothing below them except the ocean. This is located just outside the atrium. On the inside is the upper level of the theater and atrium. Working aft there is the Whiskey Bar, the Italian-themed Ana Bascarpetta restaurant, the Mexican-inspired Los Lobos restaurant, the photo gallery, and the 24-hour local bar and grill. All the way at the aft is the Indulge Food Hall, a new complimentary food truck concept that allows guests to order several different types of cuisine, all from a tablet. Decks 9 through 11 consists of various types of different cabins. Other than the cabins, Deck 12 houses the medical center, studio lounge, and the lowest level of the suite-only area, known as the Haven, which has its own key card accessible elevator bank. 13 and 14 mirror 12 with the haven and cabins. Deck 15 still has yet more cabins, but also houses the lowest level of the Mandara Spa and Salon. Deck 16 has yet more cabins, as well as some more public spaces. At the front is the Pulse Fitness Center and the upper level of the Mandara Spa and Salon. Aft houses the Haven Restaurant, Lounge, Bar, and the lowest level of their 2 outdoor decks featuring a bar, infinity pool, and sauna. 17 starts forward with the Observation Lounge. Enclosed within is the Galaxy Pavilion. Aft of this is the upper pool deck, completed with a pool, 2 infinity hot tubs, and the exit of the only water slide found on board. Located aft of here is the Surfside Cafe port side and 2 specialty restaurants starboard. Behind here are the adults-only Vibe Beach Club and the upper level of the Haven Sun Deck. '18 forward has a kids' aqua park and a sun deck. In the superstructure amidships is a mini golf course, several outdoor gaming areas, the lowest level of the 3-deck high and nearly 1,400-foot-long Prima Speedway, and the entrances of the 3 dry slides, 2 racing slides, and a drop slide, going all the way down to Deck 8. '19 sees the highest of the sun decks and the mid-level of the go-kart track. And finally on 20 is the entrance of the water slide forward and the highest level of the go-kart track, which encircles the base of the funnel amidships. Powering all of this is a diesel-electric system consisting of 2 12V and 3 8L units that also helps provide power to the ship's propulsion, which consists of 2 ABB 16.5 megawatt Azipods and 3 bow thrusters. Following the delivery to NCL at the Venice shipyard, Prima prepared for her maiden voyage to commence out of Reykjavik, Iceland. On August 27th, docked right across from Norwegian Star, Norwegian Prima was officially christened and departed on an 8-night cruise ending in Amsterdam. Following that cruise, she spent the next month out of Amsterdam before transitioning to running cruises out of the United States. With the first several rounds of voyages completed, it was time to really dig into the reviews. Did NCL's smaller ship venture work? Well, to put it bluntly, it was a fairly mixed bag. Let's start with the negatives found with the ship's design, and then move on into the positives. The biggest overall problem pointed out with the ship's design is how small some of the venues are and how they interacted with each other. Entertainment and dining venues such as the Prima Theater, the Improv, Indulge Food Hall, and Sig Norman's were particular pointers due to the fact that there was far too little seating to accommodate the number of guests wanting to go there, even just once. The flow from different areas seemed to be hit and miss, with some areas being very easy to navigate. But other areas, like on deck 17 amidships, there were problems. In this case, if one wanted to go to the forward parts of that deck and they were using the aft elevator bank, they would have to go through Surfside Cafe or several specialty dining areas in order to get there. Another complaint was similar to what was stated about Encore, in that the top decks were far too limited in complimentary, no-activity related items. With this ship, only the first roughly 40% of the top decks could be utilized for free for relaxing or chilling. All of the rest of the open areas were taken up by the Haven, Vibe Beach Club, or the extensive go-kart track. For some, the pool area just forward of the track was seen as far too small. The Concourse Sculpture Park, though novel, was seen as a waste of space. It was felt that this area could be better utilized, as the only thing passengers could do there was walk through once, take a look, and then leave. There was no other way for the space to be used. And because of how open the ship is regarding the public areas, the ship is definitely more geared to be a warmer weather and climate ship, as most public areas are exposed to the elements and can't be enclosed, limiting what passengers are able to utilize in a colder and rougher market. In summary, with the negative side of reviews, it can be concluded that many felt that the ship was confused in what it was trying to offer. Now, when it came to the positive side of things, the ship seemed to excel. First, the brighter and upscale feel was done very well, being more than subtle but not overpowering. The increase in typical cabin space and how they were laid out was noticed by all, even for those staying in the interior and studio cabins. Despite the smaller size and venues, the many choices in food, activities, and entertainment was highly praised, with the Indulge Food Hall being at the top of that list. Certainly, the wide-open wraparound promenade on Deck 8 was a much-loved area, providing much-needed outdoor space and the ability to do many different activities without feeling cramped. This type of offering has been sorely missed by so many cruisers in general for the last 10 to 20 years on other ships, and NCL went all in with bringing this type of feature back. The versatility of some of the venues, such as the Prima Theater being able to be easily converted into a nightclub, was seen as genius, as this allowed for better overall use and prevented having to install an entirely different venue elsewhere. And finally, the ship does a fantastic job with being outward-looking and letting in so much natural light, brightening up the already well-lit interior even more. So, did NCL's mission of proving smaller ships were the way to go work? Well, just like the reviews, the results were mixed. What NCL ultimately ended up doing with Prima was that they basically took the final members of the Breakaway Class, such as Encore, and squeezed them down into an over 25,000 ton smaller vessel, and in a few cases, more offerings were added. My personal opinion is that NCL actually did quite a fine job with the overall design of Prima, managing to squeeze everything they wanted to on board. The go-kart track alone is incredible with what they were able to do with it, having it essentially hug the exhaust machinery area and the funnel on multiple levels. But that brings us to this point. Should they have put things like the track on this ship? Absolutely not. Prima, again, essentially suffered from the same issues that Encore had, having too little space for non-activity based complementary areas. And she was over 25,000 tons smaller than Encore. The main lesson that can be taken away from Prima's design is that if a smaller ship is going to be pursued, sacrifices have to be made. Taking ships like Norwegian Encore, Oasis of the Seas, or Carnival Celebration, and literally squeezing them down into vessels 15%, 25%, or even smaller simply does not work. It is important that both cruise lines and passengers alike realize that there have to be limitations. Otherwise, everything that the ship offers will be too small, out of place, and oversaturated, and those are things that no passenger wants to deal with. Oftentimes, it will have to be the major activities and attractions that have to get cut, because they often take up the most of the little real estate that these ships have. So did Prima work? Yes and no. She obviously set out to demonstrate the viability of the small ship, but between how she was designed and how she has been run, the results were at best mixed. It seems to come down to where she operates and what kind of itinerary she runs that determines the reviews. Oddly enough, despite her being more of a warmer climate ship, it seems that port-intensive and more unique voyages to areas like Northern Europe are the cruises she excels in, probably because of both her outward-looking trait plus the lack of passengers being limited to being on the ship with several thousand other people at the same time. It is when she runs the typical itineraries out of areas like Florida ports, often involving multiple sea days, that she suffers with guests, saying there is too little space allotted for entertainment spaces as well as complimentary outdoor spaces to handle even just the standard passenger capacity, let alone anything higher than that. At the end of the day, it was a gamble, and NCL did well with what they felt was best. And like any brand new product, there will ultimately be bugs and issues that have to be resolved. It is then up to both the passengers to send realistic and constructive feedback, and for the cruise lines to implement, change, and improve the design. There is never a perfect ship. After coming to the US for the first time in early October 2022, Prima sailed out of New York for cruises to Bermuda and Canada. After a few weeks there, she repositioned to Galveston to run Western Caribbean itineraries. In mid-November, she then repositioned again to run Caribbean cruises out of Miami and then Port Canaveral. After that, she went across the Atlantic to run cruises around Europe for the summer 2023 season. It was around this time in early 2023 that some additional information came out regarding the future members of the Prima Class. Previously, it had been reported that all the remaining members of the class, 3 through 6, were going to be roughly around 10% bigger. Now, it was released that yes, 3 and 4 were going to be 10% bigger with an expected tonnage of 157,000 tons. But it was then stated that 5 and 6 were going to be 20% bigger, which would make them the largest ships in NCL's fleet, being roughly equal to a few thousand tons bigger than Encore. Additionally, 5 and 6 are planned to be powered with dual fuel engines, able to run on both traditional marine diesel and methanol. A few months later, in August, Norwegian Viva officially entered service. Because of the little time to actually do any proper changes, Viva had very few alterations to her design, so she received roughly the same reviews as Prima. On November 2nd, the name and exterior renderings were released for the third member, Norwegian Aqua. A lot was riding on this announcement to see if there would be any changes, and there were indeed a lot. The most noticeable of which was the absence of the massive go-kart track for what the company called the first water coaster at sea. She entered service in March 2025, and it could be quickly determined that NCL had made a huge number of corrections regarding flow, size of venues, their locations, and public space size in general. The biggest praise outside of the general increase in size of the vessel was the lack of the multi-level track. Though the waterslide roller coaster feature does take up a large amount of space, it is easily far quieter, and it also allows for the decks below to actually be utilized. And best of all, it is complimentary. While the design still isn't perfect, it was definitely a step in the right direction for many. In September 2024, information regarding Prima 4 was announced. She would be known as Norwegian Luna and feature a lot of the same changes Aqua implemented. On top of that, she will feature one of the most well-received paint schemes on an NCL ship yet. Though no information is known about 5 and 6 at the present time, It seems clear that NCL took much of the feedback regarding Prima and Viva and made as many improvements as is realistically possible. Just the move to make the succeeding ships bigger was the best possible option due to the fact that everything that the ships offer necessitates a larger platform. Otherwise, there would have to be a lot of cuts and sacrifices made. As of the making of this video, Norwegian Prima is continuing to sail for Norwegian Cruise Line, running cruises out of the ports of Southampton and Reykjavik. She is scheduled to return to Port Canaveral in November 2025 through November 2026. After that, she will reposition to run cruises out of the port of New Orleans through at least March 2027. At a time when the cruise industry was seeing more paying passengers than it was in years prior, it was ever present in the minds of the various lines that the need to stand out and offer something unique had to be at the top of the priority list, more so than ever before. For Norwegian, they decided to pursue something that was considered an impossible task, going against the proven megaship concept. What resulted was a grand experiment that at least initially did not bring the success and fanfare that her owners had hoped. But that is what happens when something that could be argued as daring comes out without having much recent inspiration to go off of. Will it work the first time? It would definitely be great if it does, but often there are a number of bugs that need to be corrected with later iterations. With Prima, what ultimately doomed her from being a runaway success was the lack of remembering the fact that she is a smaller ship. Had some of the necessary sacrifices been made whilst continuing to innovate and bring in new items, perhaps her story would be different. Although, and more importantly, she did provide much needed feedback and in part demonstrated that smaller ships can work, but it can't be done by taking existing megaships with everything they offer and simply shrinking them down. Norwegian Prima may have had a rougher start than most cruise ships, but thanks to the willingness to try and offer something different, she helped pave the way forward in improving not only her coming sisters, but to provide the necessary details and information that will continue to influence smaller and mid-sized cruise ship design for the next few decades.
I know that it's not too late. I know I made mistakes, I know I lied. I should have noticed, yeah, I should have tried. And all the loving that I just ignored, I'm gonna revive it, I'm gonna revive it. you.